Hello, Daniel King here with another solo episode of Your Group Practice. And today I'm going to talk about something I've noticed in some of the more interesting practices that I've encountered recently. And that is a willingness to take a stand. So you've probably heard conversations about the importance of mission, vision, values, all that sort of stuff. And it can seem a little abstract. It can seem like a step that you can skip on the way to building a great business. And that may or may not be true. But what I have noticed in the group practice world is that practices that can straightforwardly articulate exactly what they stand for have certain advantages. And especially in the early-ish days of building a practice, I think the advantages are way greater than the disadvantages. So let me give you some examples so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. I have encountered Christian practices. I have encountered LGBTQ practices. I have encountered Jewish practices. So these are practices where either there is an identity group that they represent or serve, where there is a broader mission that everyone knows about, all the key stakeholders, from the patients to the clinicians to the support staff to the owner. And having that broader mission that everyone knows about, it creates a clarity. It creates a sense of this is why we're here. And don't get me wrong, I think in the mental health world and the therapy world, there's a certain core set of values that pretty much any practice can stand behind and follow. But over time, with the emergence of so many group practices, I have seen a kind of generic approach to branding in the industry set in, where you'll see practices that say they're going to get patients clarity. You'll see practices that say they care about their clinicians. And I'm sure that those things are true generally, but there's this generic quality that is set into the branding. There's so many practices that have the same name, right? How many have you found that are called Clarity? Not to be critical of anyone who has the name Clarity, but there are a lot of practices called Clarity, for example. And so there's a way in which you fail to understand your own uniqueness if you do what everyone else is doing, and if you talk to people in a way that everyone else is talking to them. And so there's a real opportunity, just like if you're a job seeker and you're trying to stand out from the 300 other people that applied for the same role, there's a real opportunity for a practice to think of itself the same way, to think of itself as unique, to understand what makes it tick. And I will tell you at the very beginning of the journey, you want to stand out. You want to attract clinicians in a crowded market where they have so many opportunities at places to work. And one of the things you can do that is really going to speak to them, because clinicians tend to be soulful people, is to get crystal clear on what you stand for, communicate that in your interview process, your website, and all of your marketing materials. So I think about the practices I've run into that have gotten really clear on why they're doing what they're doing and what exactly they're doing. They have some major advantages that I want to talk to you about today. So the three big ones that I found, and one disadvantage that I'll talk about at the end, the three big ones are attracting clinicians, number two, attracting patients, number three, reducing founder burnout risk. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to give you one disadvantage that I've seen. I think in most cases, it probably still makes sense, especially in the early days, to stand for something. We'll talk about the one disadvantage I see at the end and some important thoughts on it. So let's start with attracting clinicians. I did one podcast with Ryan Duckworth, and Ryan runs a Christian practice in Michigan. And it took me a little while to understand, some of the ways in which he built the practice and some of the reasons for why this practice is so attractive to clinicians. I'm not Christian, so it took me some empathy to understand exactly what was going on there, what was so powerful about the choice that Ryan made. And he talked about his interview process, in which he would very explicitly discuss what the practice stood for with anyone that interviewed there. And there's a level of honesty there that I think is super powerful. You're allowing people to see the truth. And that's a beautiful thing when you can do it, when there aren't risks of people in some way undermining you. Then I think it's a beautiful thing to be transparent. I'm not saying that you should 100% of the time be transparent about everything that happens in your practice, but when you can be transparent without significant risk, I think it's generally good practice, because authenticity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And so for Ryan to be able to say, we are a Christian practice, people are going to feel that. They're going to feel the truth of that. And if they're a clinician who's considering working at the practice, it's so much easier for them to opt in or opt out, because they know exactly what they're dealing with. They know exactly what the score is. There's no surprises. There's no hemming and hawing. And so I think it's so important to find unique ways to attract clinicians. The best practices are able to keep them. As investors, one of the first things we look at is whether a practice has a successful track record of attracting and retaining clinicians. When you know what you stand for, you can attract clinicians more easily, but you can also retain them more naturally, because in those moments of challenge and turbulence, and in the group practice world, just like in any other business, there's going to be moments of turbulence. You have a why that clinicians can fall back on. You can remind them of why they're there. And they're going to be reminded frequently. The clearer your message is, the prouder you are of who you are, the more they'll be reminded, and the easier it will be to retain clinicians. And there's going to be all kinds of challenges in the future that make it harder for practices to retain clinicians. We can get into that in another episode. But attracting and retaining clinicians, absolutely core to what you do. It may be the most important thing, other than the quality of therapy you provide. So attracting clinicians is easily in the top 5 of most important things you need to do as a practice owner. And you're going to have a huge leg up if you're clear on what you stand for. Next, let's talk about patients, because look, therapy is a special thing. We wouldn't be here if we didn't believe that. Part of what makes it special is that human connection between patient and clinician, that therapeutic relationship. And that therapeutic relationship is influenced by the set and setting, right? People in the psychedelic world talk about the importance of set and setting, and it really matters in therapy as well. People need to feel safe. They need to feel open. They need to feel cared for. And if I come to the table with a particular set of views, a particular sense of the world, a particular worldview, I want to know that there's at least going to be respect for my uniqueness from my clinician. I don't need them to agree with absolutely everything I think, but I need to have a feeling that I can belong here if I'm going to open up and be vulnerable enough to get the good outcomes from therapy that I'm seeking. And so that set and setting is going to be so deeply influenced by what the practice stands for. Especially in the self-pay world, there's a lot of competition for patients. You've got to get good at marketing, a little less so in the in-network world where we generally are. But, I look at a lot of self-pay practices, and I can tell you that arms race to attract patients, you want a leg up. And it's all well and good to have marketing skills, to know how to build good online and offline marketing. But you have such an advantage, even if you're not an experienced marketer, if you have clear positioning. And again, if authenticity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, it's not just powerful for attracting clinicians, it's powerful for attracting patients. Clinicians and patients are both human beings, and they can both feel the power of authenticity. And so you're going to have a much easier time attracting patients if you know what you stand for. Third, reducing burnout risk. This is such an issue with group practices. Of the more than 80 group practice owners I have met, I can't tell you how many are feeling a sense of burnout. And burnout is complex. I don't want to oversimplify it. There are many factors at work. But there's that old great Nietzsche line, he who has a why can bear any how. Viktor Frankl is another famous thinker who talked a lot about the importance of meaning. When you know what you stand for, you define that, you're shaping your sense of meaning when it comes to your work, when it comes to your group practice. And so I know, reflecting on my own journey with burnout in the past, a big part of it has come in those scenarios where I'm not really sure what I'm doing or what I stand for. And so, I still sometimes deal with burnout today, even though I do work that I'm super aligned with. And boy, do I recover faster. It feels like burnout for me today is more purely physiological than it is existential. And so the risk of both burning out and the severity of that burnout when you do burn out, I think you can significantly mitigate those risks if you know what you stand for. Other people are going to have a much easier time supporting you through burnout if they're bonded to you by something deeper than just a paycheck. You're able to really build a community, and communities help reduce burnout risk. Believe you me. So those are, I think, three big reasons to get clear on what you stand for. I want to also, I always like to play devil's advocate and challenge my own thinking. So I'm going to share one kind of counterpoint, which is if you very clearly define what you stand for as a group practice, are you alienating folks? And is there a risk that it becomes much harder to stay consistent as you grow, much harder to remain on message as you grow? Because aren't there, once you reach a certain size, don't you want more clinicians and more patients? And if you're speaking to one identity group, or if you're speaking to just one set of somewhat polarizing values, are you limiting the growth of your practice? And I think that's a fair counter argument that's worth dwelling on here. I think there's ways in which meaning can evolve. And so I think my strongest initial response to that perspective is what you stand for can shift over time. And by clearly understanding that and communicating that, you're continually giving people an opportunity to opt in and opt out. You're continually giving people an opportunity to choose your group practice again. And that's not a bad thing. As much as we can easily be insecure about retention, you're giving people a gift by giving them a job that they feel aligned with. And if they no longer feel aligned, sometimes the best thing is for them to go elsewhere to free up your energy and free up the practice's energy such that it can be renewed and bring in new people that feel more of a sense of alignment with what you're doing. So the meaning that you're creating, the mission that you stand for, that can evolve. It's not a reason not to define a mission. Knowing that it's going to shift because all creativity is flow, that's okay. It's not a problem. It's not a reason not to define it. It's a reason to do the hard work again and again. I hope you enjoy. Be so well. And as always, you can reach out to me at dan@firesidestrategic.com if any of this resonates and you want to chat. Have a wonderful day. Take care.